Hey friends, Seeking Our Spirits back with another good episode. This is episode 41. Got to sit down with a friend of mine, Colin Gillette. Colin's actually a directee of mine in spiritual direction, so it was really fun to get to speak to him in this context, and I hope that you enjoy. As always, thanks for your support. Keep hitting the like buttons and support buttons, and share the episodes around. The best way to support is to come on the show yourself and chat, or send me names of folks that you think would be good to chat as well. Or if you just want to tell a story and not come on the episodes, but we can share your story of spirituality, call and leave me a message at 615-933-9737. And you contact me at seekingourspirit@gmail.com to either be on the show or if you're interested in spiritual direction. So, thanks again for everything. Hope you guys enjoy this, and we'll talk to you soon. Peace. All right, my friend Colin Gillette, good morning.
Morning.
Good to have you on here. I'm excited to have you as a guest on the show because I don't know. I'm interested because I get to interact with you in spiritual direction, and so we have a rapport and know each other, and I've had lots of good discussions. But I get to now jump into maybe. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if it's different. We'll see if it's a different angle. But anyway, I'm glad that you were willing to come on the show, and I appreciate you. Why don't you just sort of, as a way in, you tell folks who you are, what you do, all that good stuff, just a brief bio.
Okay. My name is Colin. I live in Northern Illinois, and I have a very small private practice in marriage and family therapy. I work with clients from the ages of 5 all the way up to late 70s, early 80s. I've been in some capacity in the field of mental health for going on 24 years now. I'm married and have amazing family. My oldest boy's 16. My youngest daughter is 10. And my free time, I ride motorcycles and I write satire for a local publication called The Paper.
Yeah, which is very funny and good. I'll tell the listeners. Awesome. Well, I guess just to jump in straight into it, and like I said, I'll be interested to see if we go anywhere in this context that we haven't gone in spiritual direction. But when you, Colin, think of spirituality in your life, where do you enter into that? I guess I'll just leave that there. When you think about what is spirituality for you and what has that been in your life, where does that story start for you?
Well,
I mean, is it childhood? Is it church relationship? Is it, and I guess, I always repeat this in the show, but I know some people, I think when I say what is spirituality to them, they think, well, I went to this church at this time and this church at this time, and that's great. And that's an important part of the story too. But I'm more digging at like that interpersonal awareness of relationship with this thing we call God, right?
I guess where I stand as an adult now, I look at it as something that's happening more in the present, and being more important in the present. And I find that to be probably the most challenging part of my spirituality is that how I try to bring it into a place of mindfulness and current awareness.
Yeah.
I find that sometimes distraction in either direction, whether it be the past or the future, tends to be a little bit more chaotic and turbulent, and being more present-minded about it feels more important.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
I think if I were to go back and say where it started for me, was probably in my early adolescence, around 13, 14 years old. I spent a lot of time by myself on my aunt and uncle's dairy farm. And so I spent a lot of time, I guess maybe in nature, if you will.
Yeah.
Um, and so, I would say that around 13, 14 years old, I had a dream that felt more powerful than your average dream, that sort of, I guess, I didn't really have any other context to put it at that age or understanding. And so I just sort of prayed and
Hmm.
said, I don't necessarily know what this is about, but if it comes from an outside source and you're hearing me, I need you to send me another sign.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that sort of your first big kind of awareness or reaching out to kind of higher power?
Yeah. I mean, I had an experience when I was probably 4, and I know that there's a lot of possibilities that it might explain it. I was 4,
Yeah.
would have been my brain matrixing things or whatnot, but the experience was so powerful that I'll never forget it. But at the
Yeah.
same time, I didn't have the cognitive awareness to even understand what to do about it
Hmm.
because I was so little.
What do you mind talking about that experience?
Yeah, no, I don't mind it. And I guess I want to preface by saying that I'm not saying that it's an explanation near as much as it's just was something that was so seared into my memory that I'll never forget it.
Yeah, yeah.
My grandparents had bought a home in a small town, about maybe 10 miles away from the one where I grew up, basically.
Mm.
And they'd had that home there for a year, and I was sleeping in one of the bedrooms having an overnight, and I woke up and there was this sort of orb figure hovering over my head, and in the middle of it was sort of this orange and yellow pitch, and it had a black ring around the outside of it with these sort of feather things doing this on the outside.
Hmm.
And it was very stationary. I remember it being like hypnotic but terrifying at the same time. And I just remember screaming and falling out of bed, and being sort of paralyzed in that until my grandmother came into the room and calmed me down and put me back to bed.
Yeah.
Uh, so I remember that very
Wow. Hey,
vividly.
yeah. That's that's I mean, I'm sure that was horrifying, but that's awesome story.
Yeah,
um,
yeah. And I mean, of course, you tell a story, and it's like when you're a kid, people, you tell tall tales when you're a child, and so,
yeah.
and I got pretty good at that too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But you know, later, later on, and I'd say maybe it's about 10 years ago, I went on a road trip to go look at breweries in Wisconsin, and I suggested to my uncle that um I thought maybe that house was haunted,
Yeah.
and I mentioned it to him, and I he said, well, I don't know what that was, but I got to ask around town and find out if anybody else ever saw anything in that house. I never followed up with him about it, but
Yeah.
it was kind of one of those. It was kind of like a consoling moment because, like, as an adult, my uncle's like, "Oh, yeah, no, I mean, stuff like that does happen to people," kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Right.
You
Because you
know?
probably felt sort of like hushed about it, as a child, or not
Yeah,
to talk about those things.
yeah, and I mean, maybe just not taking this seriously because I was 4, and
Yeah.
maybe I have no idea how I described it at 4 years old. So,
Yeah.
I mean,
That's
they
powerful.
might have.
That's powerful. I mean, and yeah, you know, well, you wouldn't be the first person on a farm to have an experience with something extra, extra worldly. So it
Yeah,
happens. Um,
yeah.
but and I mean, on a serious note, it's a commonly said thing that children, the veil is thinner for children, and kids tend to,
Mm.
I don't know, it would seem that kids see more, experience more, are more open. Um, at least that's a commonly said and held sort of belief, but not just with sort of experiences like yours, but even when you get into things like spirits or ghosts or whatever you want to call them, kids tend to seem to be more perceptive of those sorts of things. So okay, well, so that experience. So what did you do with that? You just tucked it away, pretty much, and that's why you're saying it felt good to be validated later.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of kept it in my pocket. I mean, there were some times where I tried to draw it. I mean, I think that maybe that really was, mind you, at the same age I had my tonsils removed, right? And they say that you don't have dreams under general anesthesia, but I had a dream that I climbed a ladder and married Wilma Flintstone. So, I mean, that, I remember that vividly too.
Okay, nice.
So, it's like one of those things where, like, that was a clear thing that people could identify. So, I
Yeah,
did start to get a little bit more interested in drawing because I didn't really have the language or the vocabulary at the time to maybe
yeah.
communicate some of those ideas.
Now you mentioned in the dream that you were going to talk about that that sort of brought you to sort of you reached out to higher power, to God. Did this experience, you were probably too young for that? Did you have an awareness of that?
No,
Okay, okay.
I was completely oblivious. Like I said, I, I don't know if there's any spiritual merits to marrying Wilma Flintstone, but
I mean,
who knows?
yeah,
But I definitely I didn't really have the, I guess we would say, the cognitive blocks to build an understanding around it at that time.
well, yeah, yeah. No, and I just mean I didn't know if like if you were raised in such a way household that it like or you were raised praying or going to church or things like that, so that if you had something like that moment, you might have naturally as a kid, you know, prayed about it or turned to,
Uh, we had a pretty standard Midwest Protestant church experience.
yeah,
You prayed at dinner, you prayed before bed, now I lay me down to sleep kind of thing. Um, but it was more, I don't know, routine and ceremonial. And it's, where you learn the Lord's Prayer and,
yeah,
some of your basic hymns and whatnot. So, I mean, one of the things I will say about my childhood when it comes to faith is that I didn't go to churches that taught me the morals of the Bible near as much as they were focused on age appropriate stories in the Bible.
hmm,
So they, you learned about David and Goliath, and you learned about, Father Abraham and all those things, but they were sort of edited for the demographic, so to
yeah,
speak.
yeah, yeah,
And so, we didn't. A lot of those stories weren't moralized near as much as it was just important that you understood the context
yeah.
when
So I'm
things were being.
assuming, they didn't teach you about Ezekiel and the spinning wheel of fire in the sky.
No,
That could have been
no,
helpful in that.
it could have
In
been helpful.
that.
It very well could have. Yeah, yeah. I mean, pretty humble
Yeah,
children's version, if you will.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know.
Okay, well, good. Well, so, and then you were talking about that dream. That was something that brought you sort of to reach for God or for higher power, right? Is that something you want to talk about?
Sure. So my junior high years were pretty rough, and I think that's kind of something that is standard for most people.
Yeah,
Um, when I look back on them, I try to. It's not that I try to block out the parts that were bad, but it's a lot more comforting to reveal the more romantic pieces, right? Um, so there was an experience in that I had as a young man that actually was reflected in a movie called The Sandlot, where a bunch of these boys get on a ride at the fair, and right beforehand they do some chewing tobacco, and then they all get off and throw up. And I had a very similar experience with my boyhood or childhood friends,
Yeah, yeah.
and so and I won't call any names out, but there was experiences like that one specifically, and others where you kind of look back when I see my childhood friends, I remember it.
Yeah.
And something about growing up in a small town that can, I think people who don't grow up in a small town have a hard time comprehending. There's a lot of times your community is sort of like a large extended family.
Oh, yeah.
So the kids you grow up with are more like your cousins than
Mhm.
they are, I mean, they're not your cousins, but some of them might be, but but for the most part, you're around each other so much all the time that you learn a lot more about one another than you would say in a larger setting. I mean,
Yeah.
you have a core group of people you know a lot about, but everybody else is just sort of off in their own things, and you don't really have many options in a small town. It is what it is. So,
Mhm.
and so with that comes like really positive and really, really negative experiences. And I was sort of sitting on that line at that time. I was also a bit of a pipsqueak, and I was diminutive in stature, and um, so my parents were divorced, and um, it wasn't pleasant to live through as a child,
Yeah.
and all of them were kind of coming to a a point at that stage of my life, and um, I'd been spending a lot of time at my aunt and uncle's farm, and so anyways, I had to preface it with all of that, but
Yeah.
this just start is that I was the church that we went to at the time was on the corner across the street from where I went to school, and I walked past it every day to go to school. So in the dream, or the experience, or what vision, or whatever you want to call it, I was walking. It didn't feel any different than any other day walking to school. It was actually a nice day. You could hear the birds singing. Was warm, and as you cross this threshold, uh, it got immediately gloomy and dark. The sky was pitch black, and it was lightning and thundering. There was no rain, and there was this sort of like, for lack of a better term, um, people running around engulfed in flames. But
Mhm.
flames doesn't really do it justice.
Mhm.
Was just the best way I can describe it.
Mhm.
And sitting at the entrance to the school was this figure that was very ominous and kind of horrifying. And like you could see these things, but it was dark,
Mhm.
you know. And I turned, and just to the right was this beautiful day right on the right hand side. And I turned to the left, and everything was still the way it was. And then one of these figures that was engulfed in flames sort of ran up right on my face. And I opened my eyes. And I was the room that I slept in was in the basement, which is, was, I mean, it was a living space, but in a basement that's still a living space, it tends to be a little bit darker.
Yeah. It's a little creepy down there. Yeah.
It, yeah, and I mean, in this case, it was dark, but it was like still warm, and I knew I was safe, and I knew I was in my bed,
Yeah.
and everything else like that. But it just sort of opened my eyes, and there was a stillness. So it was the same kind of dark, but it was without all of the chaos and turmoil, and it was just very still.
Mhm.
And it was just in that moment that my experience with having a bad dream just made it felt like something different. And I didn't really know whether it was or not, but at that time, I had a presence of mind to actually reach out and say something.
Yeah. So you prayed.
I prayed,
Yeah. Yeah.
lying there
Yeah.
still.
Yeah.
And
That's
then,
intense.
yeah. And then moments later, I fell back asleep. I mean, it was, it wasn't like I was afraid to go back to sleep and have another dream. I
Yeah.
just kind of had a calm wash over me that I was like, all right, well, I addressed that. So I'm going to go back to bed.
Yeah. Do you, so, uh, do you have like, well, I guess I'm curious, and I talk a lot about like the ways in which God speaks to different people as if they're different languages. And dreams and visions are certainly one of those, but I tend to, I don't encounter that as frequently with folks. Does have you had more of that sort of thing in your life? Is that a frequent or fairly frequent occurrence, or is it just like that one, or maybe one or two in your life?
Yes, I have. Um, hmm, it's interesting how they happen.
Hmm. So
And
not only, so let me stop you real quick before you go there, but like, so not always sleeping.
um, not always.
Okay. And then it was interesting. I was gonna say, man, what a bad did you not want to go to school after that experience?
I didn't want to go to school before that experience. So, I mean, you know, and I will say as a psychotherapist, there's Carl Jung is a big proponent of sort of the metaphysical.
Yeah,
So I can't say that um, there isn't something about my subconscious that had played a huge role in
sure,
shaping that experience for me.
sure.
Because going to school was very much like that in my day to day life
Yeah.
at that time. So
Mm,
I won't deny that that my brain was doing its job
hmm.
and sort of shaping that for me. But there was there was something underneath that felt very different,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know.
Well, even that, man, I mean, it's interesting to think about kind of from a Jungian perspective too, like, um, which to me is a central spiritual concept is, well, I guess I always mix up, yeah, Jung and then like Joseph Campbell stuff, but like, you
I
know,
mean, they're yeah, I mean they're intertwined.
they're
Yeah,
in
I
a
mean,
conversation for sure, yeah.
yeah,
But
yeah,
uh sort of being called into that cave, right? Doing the shadow work.
yeah,
So yeah, like in a way it makes sense that for a middle schooler, school in some ways and the life and the experiences that school brings is kind of the shadow work, right? It's that's
yeah,
where you're confronting all the demons and you're confronting all the, darkness, and so in some ways it makes perfect sense.
yeah.
Um, but that's
But yeah,
interesting.
no, I didn't want to go. I didn't want to go before, so it wasn't. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, so you said you've had a couple other experiences like that, but they were different.
Yeah, they weren't as terrifying. Um, I don't know. And at times I wonder if some of them weren't dissociative in
Hmm.
some way, or like a coping strategy. And the thing is, like, I don't want to hinge all of it on God, um, and hinge all of it on a metaphysical level. But I mean, sometimes in a waking state, I've had them. As I've gotten older and done a lot of personal work, they're a little bit more pragmatic. I'll give you an example. Um, you and I had talked about praying when I rode my motorcycle, and like devoting that time to being in the moment. After I talked about how riding a motorcycle had become one of the most mindful things that I'd done in my adult life,
Hmm.
because you didn't really have any room to do anything else but live in the moment. And
Mhm.
so literally after that session, well, the day after, I went on a ride, and there's this area called Sherland outside my house, and there's this um, old tree stump that the farmer had cut the tree down, but he'd left the stump about 6 foot high. And everybody around that area locally knows it is Stumpy.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure who does it, but somebody decorates Stumpy for the season, like year round. And so Stumpy was dressed up like Uncle Sam at this point. And I remember that because I noticed it, like I'd ridden past it at least a dozen times, but that particular moment, sort of in a more of a state of prayer, I recognized it. And there's a real tight, 20-mile-an-hour corner that goes around Stumpy out there. And and so, as I came around and was going, off into the wilderness, this hawk just sort of came down and hovered next to me for a quarter mile. And I just really felt that was God saying, "How you doing?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it was, it wasn't diving down for prey. There was no other perch for it to land on. It just sort of was just hovering for a quarter mile before it soared off in another direction.
Mhm.
And there was something about that experience that felt like it was intended for me at that moment.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, and I love those examples because it's, I have this conversation frequently with people, but it's like we want to, and I'm the same way. I'm naturally want to then say like, it was a bird and it was checking things out, like,
right.
and you want to like discredit all of that. And yet at the same time, to me, what's most important is, I mean, we can do that with anything. We can explain away anything, but the
Hmm.
point is how it affected you in that moment,
Right.
right? It it
Yep.
it it brought you into a different state. It
Hmm.
gave you those thoughts. It brought you into that. You've used the word mindfulness a few times, right? It brought you into a different sort of consciousness in that moment. And to
Yep.
me, that's the point, right? It doesn't matter if the bird was divinely sent or so, you know what I mean? I mean, none
Right.
of that matters, but the effect it has on us is,
Hmm.
I think, what we're to hold on to.
Yeah.
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 Um,
Um,
I'm wondering what. So so we've skipped around a little bit talking about just
yeah.
different kind of outstanding experiences in your life. Um, I mean, where in there did you start to develop sort of I mean, you mentioned praying to God in that dream moment. Um, did you develop what you would call a relationship with God prior to that age? What has that looked like for you throughout life?
So, um, I will say that prior to the, the sort of vision that I described at going over to my school and the seeing the dark and the light and all of those things, I had a very child acceptance of what mom and dad told me,
Uh-huh.
what the adults said. Like this was a thing that I think maybe because faith was so concrete for me at that time, it wasn't something that I even thought twice about. But it wasn't something that really gauged my everyday understanding. And I just really had a child's understanding of it.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So it really
You
sort of
know?
did take these bigger kind of events or experiences to sort of
Yeah.
drive you into that relationship a little more.
Yeah. And I will say that, and this part is a little hard to talk about sometimes. And even right now in this moment, I'm kind of recognizing that, I have some family that might hear what
Yeah.
I'm about to say. And so I'm saying it mindfully, but uh it was it was not a happy it had its happy moments, but it was not a happy childhood.
Mm-hmm.
and it was not a happy period of my life. It was pretty miserable.
Yeah.
And so what that vision really kind of did is that I went to go visit my father about an hour and a half away, and he had essentially kind of ditched us and left for the East Coast. And he put my mother and her side of the family through their fair share of hell,
Mm-hmm.
if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but he was very charismatic in the way that he could present ideas. And one of the ways that he was charismatic was about how he had found Jesus in Baltimore. And I made jokes later about how as that's where Jesus was hanging out, was
Yeah.
Baltimore, Maryland. Like
Yeah.
at that time in the 80s, that's amazing. Uh, which is where that sort of satirical edge comes in on my part. But
Is that where he went after he left Chicago?
yeah, or where after he left the areas, he left Chicago and he went to Baltimore, and I think he hung out in Taiwan for a while. But kind of like Elvis sightings, right?
Way down to New
So
Orleans.
his return to the Midwest sort of intersected with that period of my life,
Mm-hmm.
and you know he was he was a very emotionally unhinged and I would say psychotic human being
Mm-hmm.
when circumstances arose. And most of the time it wasn't warranted, but the times where it was, it really struck a chord with me at that age.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess I'll give you an example. Uh, and I'll circle back around to how my spirituality sort of found its way there. I um I was sitting having a private conversation with my dad, and my dad said that he'd like me to go to church. And so didn't really think much of it because I had never, I mean, I went to church. At that time, it wasn't as regular as it was when I was little, but it was still regular enough. And it took me to a church that was a little bit more Pentecostal and a little bit more evangelical in nature. So it was a little more designed to sort of reach out and have this energy and things of that nature. And it, at the time, you know, what was presented to me about what was presented to me about God's word really answered the question of direction at that time. Like, this is information that I asked for a week ago,
Mm-hmm.
and here it is in front of me today.
In the scripture.
And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the message of salvation, which is pretty common in that, breed of faith. And so, salvation made a lot of sense to me at the time because of the immense bullying and loneliness and isolation that I felt as a child in my situation. And all of those stars sort of lined up for me. I turned around that weekend and I to, went back home, and one of my bullies attacked me in the locker room, and I retaliated, and it turned into a big issue. And I refused to tell the school principal, who was a golfing buddy of my grandmother's, what was happening because I said I'm not going to suffer more abuse by it's telling. And the guy that did it, the guy that started it, he says, no, don't worry, that won't happen, which I thought was a lot more integrity from a 13-year-old than I was seeing from a lot of adults.
Yeah.
And so but I still refused to say anything. And so I don't know to what degree the principal at the time said something, but it was enough to get my dad's attention. And my dad basically made a really violent threat to my principal at the time about, he was going to deal with it, or my dad was going to come up there and do something involving a baseball bat. And so my principal asked me about it. He was not pleased, but he didn't, I mean, to be fair, he didn't blame me for it.
Yeah.
He said something to it. And I remember asking him, I was like, well, rather than me talk to my dad, why don't you do something about me getting bullied? Like,
Yeah.
you address that. And so there was something about that whole experience that I don't know, like all of those boxes started getting checked for me.
Mm.
And I will say, as a young man, I dove in head first because it felt like that's what I needed. And that's when I guess maybe that's when it really started.
Yeah.
Like the search for a relationship with God.
Mm-hmm. So
And
if I can put that in my own words, so you're saying that sort of these experiences with home life and school life, and then also the flavor of Christianity you were being exposed to, sort of all came together in terms of your need. Like you were experiencing some intense stuff, praying about it, and then you felt like those things were actually being heard and in some way, shape, or form being addressed.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
mind
Which of
you,
course is going to reinforce. I mean, that's positive reinforcement for you.
yeah.
Eventually.
Now, mind you, I want to point out here that my mom's side of the family went through some pretty horrible pain when I made the decision to move to my dad's as a result of these things. And they were very I would say hurt. It's possible they were bitter and resentful of the idea that, me saying quote, I'm guessing this is God's will. And I don't think that a family that loves somebody is necessarily keen on hearing that. And I'm sure that they were horrified to
Yeah,
hear that the religious nuts had gotten a hold of me. And
yeah,
to some extent they did.
yeah,
So I don't want to paint this as like my dad was a hero in any stretch of the imagination or anything, but the circumstances lined up the way that they did. And I'd like to say that 3 months later, I'm in the back of a pickup truck with my brother on my way to Baltimore with my dad and his wife at the time screaming and having a fight with each other as my brother and I are hunched down, huddled down in the bed of a pickup truck. And it was there that I prayed that I needed to make a decision about what I spent a lot of time in prayer in the back of that pickup truck.
mm-hmm.
Not necessarily for my life in the moment, but what I was going to do with it if I survived that trip. And that's when I made the decision that, like, I realized that I'd made a decision to go to my dad's, and a lot of people were really hurt as a result of it. So now I had to sort of live with this direction that I had gone on, right?
Yeah,
So I was like, okay, well now God, we got to think about what's next because I can't live here for the rest of my life either. This isn't going to work
mm-hmm.
forever as well. And so that's when I really, you know, that's when God started putting people in my life that helped me get to a point where, at 16, I ended up living not, I don't want to say completely on my own, but living on the grace of members of the community that I was in.
Mm.
And just people that were, God put these people in my life that my life wouldn't be what it is today if God hadn't put those people there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
That's beautiful.
and so, and then, I went to a Lutheran school and, I had a lot of exploration there with faith. in a denomination context. And I
Hmm.
spent a weekend at a monastery, and did a lot of stuff there. It was a little bit more academic. I
Hmm.
learned a lot about different things in terms of philosophy and whatnot. And I'll say that I've had stretches of time where I've been angry at God and haven't really wanted to talk to him very much, where I've questioned my faith,
Sure.
things of that nature. So it hasn't necessarily been a smooth ride, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it's gotten to a place now where I've I have more peace in it than I think I ever did along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. You're saying that reminds me of, like, in some ways, from my perspective as somebody who has the honor and the privilege of walking with people in their spiritual lives. I never really want, um be careful how I say that. I'm suspect of someone who claims their spiritual life is smooth sailing. And I have a friend that says that adamantly, but I think he's meaning something different. He's not saying that life doesn't go up and down. He's just saying that his relationship with God has stayed, which I get that as a sort of distinction. But at the same time, I feel like if you're not struggling spiritually, then you're really probably not actually paying much attention to that relationship at all. The struggles
Right.
is part of it, and it's a good thing actually in the end. Um, because it's how we grow in that relationship. But um, can't really remember where I was going there. But when you well, so one, just a couple of little clarifications. So you were going to Baltimore with your dad in that truck.
Yeah. To visit his friends from Baltimore when he was living there.
Oh, okay. I was still
Yeah.
connecting that back to the
Yeah.
the perception that Jesus was in Baltimore. So
Yeah.
I
No.
didn't know I didn't know if you guys
Yeah.
were going on
He,
some,
he
like,
he found
pilgrimage.
his way back to Illinois.
Yeah. Okay. Um, and then, like, when you said about, the community sort of, taking care of you, um, that's, I mean, such a beautiful image. And how people can be the gifts to us in our life. And uh, well, and it's just, I don't know. It makes me sort of wonder about those people and who they were, and 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 if they understood that was, um, as important as it was to you. And so, were you, like, emancipated at that time, or were you just sort of, there wasn't?
I mean, essentially, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so, and I also want to give my mom and her side of the family credit too, because if it weren't for their support, if it weren't for their supporting my decision to stay in that town after my father and I had a falling out,
Hmm.
it wouldn't have gone that way either.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's not like they said, fine, we're done with you. It wasn't like that. It was more along the lines of they understood that that was what was best for me.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so, I mean, they weren't thrilled about it, I'm sure. I'm sure they wanted me to come back home and
Hmm.
be with them, but I think pragmatically, I think they all understood it was what was best for me.
Yeah.
Um, so they didn't they did not give resistance to it, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
It wasn't a fight. Um, Not like when I first left,
Hmm.
there wasn't a resistance there, but there wasn't a dismissiveness of it. It was grace on their part too.
Hmm.
Um, but the community that I was in, you know, I guess the best example of describing it is that there was a young lady that I went to school with who had an aneurysm her freshman year of high school,
Oh.
and she was wheelchair bound. And
Mm.
it was her goal by the time she graduated high school that she was going to walk on her own 2 feet to go up and get her diploma. And when she did, everybody in the community, wasn't like an announcement like, hey, Stacy's coming up here to get her diploma. Everybody in the community knew that Stacy was what that was her goal. And when she got up and did it, everybody up and gave her a standing ovation.
Mhm.
So that's like that's what that community was to me at that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know it wasn't that for everybody,
Yeah.
but that's like that's the representation to me of what it was about
Yeah.
for me too. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome though. That'll warm your heart, just knowing
Yeah.
that there's the people are still out there that will step up and take care of folks, and that's
Yeah.
what it's about.
There weren't, that's not to say there weren't times where I didn't make it difficult on them.
Of course, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. I was I'd become as a survival skill, I'd become a bit of a bullshitter.
Hmm.
And so uh that part of my cognitive awareness hadn't quite clicked yet.
Hmm.
And so that took some time too. Um but I will tell you that that experience is where I learned how to trust people again,
Hmm.
or learn what to trust or how to do that.
Hmm.
And so I definitely got my bumps, bruises, and scrapes along the way. And but uh, the sorry, the primary home that I stayed in when my father and I had our first falling out was my best friend Erin and her parents. They took me in, and so I got to live with another family and see how another family lived. And I remember distinctly telling my mom that, for all of the preaching I heard about how people should live, it was interesting to live with a family that was actively doing the things that I heard preached about.
Yeah.
That was living a Christian life and doing Christian things.
Mm.
And instead of talking about how important it was that everybody do Christian stuff, they
Mm.
were they were actively doing it. And so that has stayed with me ever since.
Yeah. Um, it occurs to me too, and I don't know. This people who listen to this episode don't know you the way that I know you in terms of we've done spiritual direction, monthly for, a good bit, now. And, um, but what strikes me in hearing, I've never heard this much background, on your story. And so a beautiful thing that strikes me is just seeing that sort of arc of the story where you, um, well, I guess really to say it simply, it's kind of beautiful to see where you are as a, husband and father and adult and a therapist who's, helping people, and to see that and know who you are now. And then to look back at that long arc and know really, the experiences that you came from. That's a pretty powerful thing. That's great.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of the things I try to keep in mind is that, like, uh, I have my embarrassments. When I try to think about the things that were hard to deal with other people, I look back in the things that I am, the blemishes on my behavior, right? The things that I have to hold myself accountable for that I've done, the
Hmm.
wrongs that I've done. And I try to remember that from when I think about what it means to forgive people,
Hmm.
is that like it's I believe it. I can't, I'm not really good at quoting scripture directly, but I'm pretty good at remembering what it said.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, you can't ask for something that you're not willing to give in terms of forgiveness, right? So
Mm.
if I'm going to ask forgiveness for me, I need to learn how to do that with other people.
Yeah,
And
actually,
so,
that's right in the Lord's Prayer, basically, right?
mhm,
Forgive us as we forgive others.
right. And so it's like one of those things where, you really, people are really good at telling their own story when they're the hero of it. But,
Hmm.
it's really like, it, it's not as that clear division of good and evil. Like the vision I had isn't so concrete in everyday life. It's a little, those lines are like more concrete in us
Mm.
and what we see ourselves. And, you know, it's, I think the thing that I've sort of carried with me since that age is that it's taken me a long time to realize is that, you know, God's just right over there,
Mm.
you
Hmm.
know, but we spend so much time trying to fix this ugly, dark space that we're insistent we're able to do. But like it's peace of mind and peace is just right over there.
Hmm. Hmm.
And how much energy we'll pour into being right about this dark, angry, ugly place that we find ourselves stuck in.
Mm.
And that's kind of where I look at forgiveness and grace is that it's really just a choice of like
Yeah,
whether or not you want to stay in it or not.
right. And it's right there in front of you, right, all the time.
And I've walked into the mire of that dark place multiple times. So it's not like I've gained some sort of new wisdom or new idea that hasn't been talked about for thousands of years. Um,
Yeah, but I love that though. I mean, it's one of my favorite sort of things to talk about with folks and to remind folks that, you know, um, yeah, it's this is where I use the word intention so much, right? It really we really have and I okay, and so I admittedly this is a lot of just bread, but I really do believe that this is what Jesus is talking about and what Scripture talks about. Um, that as Jesus would say, the kingdom of God is near, is right here. Right? In my mind, that's how I understand that the kingdom of heaven is right here, accessible, right? Not chronologically, not we're waiting for it to come near, right? But it is near. It's accessible right here. You can access it at any moment, and you can choose to be and live in that. Now, part of what's tricky about it is you do have to actually make the choice to access it every moment, right? Because it's fleeting, it goes away. But sort of in the same way that you're talking about, like the choice to forgive or to love, I see the same message there, right? We can choose to, in our day to day, moment to moment lives, we can choose to choose love, to choose forgiveness, to choose selflessness. In other words, to choose God, or in which I believe making those choices is what creates heaven on earth. We can choose that again and again and again, or we can just choose to be in the darkness, in the chaos of our
mhm.
world. And what I would call is distraction usually. I don't know if that gets too woo woo or hippy dippy, but which I am, but to me, making those choices of love and forgiveness and um, living consciously, that um, I don't know, that just it makes everything better to me. It's positive reinforcement versus when I choose to go down the other path. It truly is just distraction. I guess what I was trying to say is like, to me, when I'm living intentionally, things feel clear. Um, when I'm not living intentionally, things feel chaotic.
Yeah.
I know that sounds esoteric, but
No,
I don't have any other way to say
I
it.
no, I mean I agree with you. I agree with you, and it's one of those things that when I talk about being mindful or is more of the process that I'm learning moment to moment.
Mm.
Because it's not like a magic trick. For me, it's not. It's not something magical. And
No.
and I will concede there's not a lot that's scientific about it. I can't. It's not something that I can put into a bottle and put a label on and shelve and say, here's this
Mm-hmm.
magical relationship. It's something that I actively have to keep working at.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, because
I
it's
will.
too experiential, right?
It's very experiential, and I will say this: I don't. I think the idea of things getting easier is a myth.
Mm-hmm.
I actually like the idea that things get more challenging
You mean just like in life?
in that relationship with God. Yeah, it's
Oh,
like
oh, yeah.
this idea that God's a genie in the bottle. That idea is sort of I'm done. Like I'm done with that. I don't even like. I don't know. That's silliness to me now.
Yeah.
Um, that's like a branding strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's more along the lines of like, okay, well, now I've done this and I've grown from it, so I look forward to doing the thing that's next
Mm-hmm.
instead of being like, oh, well, now that I've learned that, life is easier. And
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I like that. It's not so much that it gets it's not so much easier or hard. It's funny. It's like I guess this is me just using the words I would use from my own experience, but like it's as if the more I grow in my spiritual life and my understanding of God, almost the less clear it gets, or the more I understand that all I know is I know nothing. um, and yet that's not scary.
yeah,
Does that make sense? It's like
yep,
it could be for people in a growing kind of faith, or when, as you use the term genie in the bottle faith, it's like that's very clear. Your understanding of God in that type of moment is very clear. This is what God is. This is my relationship with God. And when that gets rattled, that's really disconcerting for someone in that phase of life, right? And I guess what I'm saying is, yeah, after you wrestle with God enough and your spiritual journey enough, it's like, well, the clarity is no longer there, but it's not disconcerting. It's like an inverse, right?
yeah, no, 100%.
Like I'm not clear. I'm not really clear on anything, as someone who is, who always considered myself a seeker, and I've always been, curious about and taken very seriously spiritual, I guess, endeavors, for lack of a better word. Um, and then being ordained now for 16 years and working in this all the time. Um, I'm not clear. I mean, the only thing I'm clear about is that there is a higher power we call God of some. I don't even put a definition on what that is or what that means. I don't care about that. And that the only thing I can describe, the only word I can use to describe that thing is love. I don't go. I have zero need to go any further than that.
I agree, man.
So yeah, so not clear, I guess. That's big and broad, but I don't know. I have peace in that.
Same. I find that now with moments of what they would refer to as existential dread,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I get comfort in knowing that whatever I'm in at the moment, what I need is right over there. Like it's just right there.
Yeah. Well, and I would, sorry, put my spiritual director hat on for a second. I would say it's not just right over there; it's right in here. Right.
I like that.
It's part of you already. Um. Yeah, good stuff. Well, I'm looking at the time here, but I want to just make sure that you have had the opportunity to name any significant other, mountain or valley points in your spiritual journey, or any other, just on an experiential level, just any other, significant experiences spiritually in your life?
I will say that the one that I'm facing in the moment, and I haven't really had it. Well, I actually got to touch on it with you briefly last time we met, and we can talk about it more when I meet with you again. But I think what's on the horizon for me coming up is got a lot to do with the satire that I've been working on for a while, and actually doing something with it.
Yeah.
And the idea of building a mirror
Mm-hmm.
to speak to the power of things. And so that's been something that I've been thinking a lot about since we met, I think last week, so
Yeah.
it's kind of like the direction that I see things going currently.
Yeah. Which is great, right? Because it's that sort of, in a sense, has moved you into like a call kind of phase, and lining up your gifts and your talents and your passions with your purpose.
Yeah. So I really appreciated this opportunity today. I'm glad you offered it, Brett.
Oh man, no, it's such a joy. The joy for me. It just, I know I repeat these things on the episodes a lot, but it just blows my mind. Like, you're a great example of it. Like, so what I usually say to people in these episodes is, like, a lot of times they're local folks who I know well, our friends or our colleagues or our parishioners of mine. And it's so great to get to sit, and hear their stories, and I get this whole other perspective on their life that I didn't have before. But you're interesting in that, it's the same point but different. We've done spiritual direction together, so I do have a glimpse into your life more than I would if you were just someone that was like, a social connection or acquaintance. And yet, sitting and doing this with you still brought out even more, story. And so that's just great. It's great. I don't know. I guess I love what it is teaching me, that, man, if I could walk around every day looking at every person that I see with those eyes, like understanding, like, man, each of these people has this big, beautiful story in their life, that would just be a great perspective to walk around with, because we're all carrying our journey with us, and we're all on a journey, and we don't think it's a big deal, and we don't think it's significant, but it's huge, and it's beautiful, and it's tough, and it's all the things. So I don't know, I'm rambling, but I think that's a cool thought.
It's great.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Well, thanks for coming on, and thanks for, spending time with me, and being vulnerable and open and sharing with the audience. I really appreciate you. Last chance, you didn't tuck away any like alien or ghost experiences there, did you, that you need to share with me?
No, but I will tell you that if I see a UFO, I'll let you know.
Yeah. Okay. Good. That's a good childhood story. That's a good one. I like that one. But yeah, awesome, man. Well, good. I guess until we meet again for spiritual direction, blessings and peace, and we'll catch up with you.
Same to you.
All right, brother. Appreciate it. Take care.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.